Welcome to Unsilent with your hosts Dave and Brian. This is not another current events podcast. We're digging deeper, diagnosing, and discussing what's really going on today, how we got here, and providing observations for future generations.
Welcome to Unsilent. We're Brian and Dave. Let us know where you think we've got things right and where we just don't get it. You can do that by visiting unsilentpodcast.com. Find us on Rumble, Facebook, social media channels, and any other place you get your social media news. So let's get into it. What shall we figure out today, Brian?
Well, I don't know if we're going to figure anything out. I have more questions
Sure
than
we will.
answers.
Sure we will.
Like usual, I have way more questions than answers. I think we got to talk about the Blob, and I first heard this term, I don't know, a month ago, maybe 2 months ago. It's not been that long, and it was through a variety of places where I first heard somebody talking about this, and the more I hear about it, the more it fascinates me, and it explains so many things, and it prompts so many other questions, and it all kind of fits together. So you're much better at this than I am. So Dave, just take a crack and, like, in a minute or two or less, whatever, what is the Blob?
The Blob. Okay, so I'm going to pull from the guy we've been talking about, Mike Benz, and I'm also going to pull from the Obama administration.
Okay.
Let's balance it out. And with all, and with credit to Mike Benz because he mentions that as well. So the Blob is essentially the great amorphous group of foreign policy heads of agencies like the CIA, the State
NSA.
Department, NSA, all the actually foreign facing, the organizations that are supposed to be foreign facing and not U.S. facing. And the idea of the Blob is that it's oozing out to control, attempting to, and inserting influence and control and censorship, et cetera, over domestic organizations as well. And now that term, the Blob, is a fascinating one because it came about because of a fellow named Ben Rhodes, who was a person in the Obama administration, and who first heard that term, that this great amorphous group of organizations was really sort of running the show. And his wife, then Victoria Newland, wrote an article. I think it was in the Brookings Institution, or maybe Wall Street Journal or something. Know the Blob, love the Blob. So it's out there. It's not some kind of whack job conspiracy theory.
Victoria Nuland is, like, who up until recently was, like, running Ukraine remotely, or running the more
the
accurately,
State Department's
running our efforts in Ukraine is maybe a better way to say it. Or something.
Yes, exactly.
So she's not some whack job who has no way to know. Like, she's in the know as much as anybody could be.
Absolutely. Yeah, she's in a position, or has been in a position of power, just like Ben Rhodes was in the Obama administration. So that's kind of the Blob.
So the Blob it's a perfect description, because there's no hard edges to it. It's all encompassing. Right. It's all everything and nothing. Like, it's abstract. It's literal. It's all kinds of stuff. Right.
Right. And it isn't. And the thing about it that makes it a Blob is even more so, I think, is that it's non-hierarchical. In other words, it's sort of a class of people and institutions that don't have, like, in the United States, we've got sort of a hierarchical government. We've got a president, a vice president, and, top down kinds of things. The Blob is very diffuse in that, but with a shared set of principles that is, we know better. That's kind of the bottom line, is we know better. That's the Blob speak.
Yeah. So one of the things that I've said on this podcast before, I'm going to alter it a little bit, is I think the founding fathers, the government that they concocted is, like, we've not seen anything as good as that ever.
Right.
If there was a flaw, I would have to say that they did a great job of putting checks and balances in place to keep people from having, in institutions like Congress versus the executive branch versus judicial, from having too much power.
Right.
What they didn't foresee is Congress people specifically, and even executive branches that from time to time abdicating that power to bureaucrats. They did not do a good job of seeing that. And so what we've seen is, over time, in my opinion, Congress has by and large delegated its power and authority to bureaucrats, and that's creating some problems. The other
Yes.
thing that they didn't see, and so I've been saying that for a while. The other thing, that the new thing I'm saying now, is the thing that they didn't see, which there's no way they could have, is this chess game that's happened globally as far as geopolitical stuff, in oil and like kingdoms coming and going and
Yeah.
whatever. Anyhow, the CIA is born in 1947 or 1944, whatever it was, something like that, and they began playing games essentially with other governments, and they have this black budget that no Congress can't even know about, and we just like give them billions of dollars a year, and even Congress can't be trusted to know what's going on.
Right.
Even the president, to a certain extent, is told it's not, this is on a need to know basis, and you don't need to know.
You don't need to know.
And so this bureaucracy, because there's no oversight, there are no checks and balances, it kind of operates outside the system. And
Right.
so a government, which I would argue the thing that makes it special and unique, one of the things, is that there's checks and balances for everything. But this has found a loophole, or created a loophole, or been granted a loophole, or we've concocted a loophole, or whatever it is. But this blob operates outside of any checks and balances. So there's oversight, in parentheses or quotation or air quotes, but there's not really oversight.
Right. Well, and I think there's not oversight because it's a sort of naturally occurring blob. In other words, it's and it's naturally occurring because of two things. It's naturally occurring because of the scale at which the United States operates financially, militarily, et cetera. So there's so much. It's so big, and it's we've got bases in all over the world, in military bases. We've got embassies all over the place. We've got CIA operatives all over the place. Who knows what else we have all over the place? There's probably other things that we don't know. So there's that. And the second thing is that the internet, and that's why I think one of the reasons it's so powerful now, the internet has allowed people to collaborate on things outside of the ways that they ever could have before. So there's the ability to organize and move large sums of money, communications, discussions, cross borders, et cetera, that never existed before. So there's really no way to foresee and to put into place regulatory control of this expanding bureaucratic administrative state and all the things that come from it, because it's just too big. That's why it's a blob. It's just like in the 1950s movies, like it just it subsumes everything around it.
Yeah, so for Kenny G, The Blob was the name of a movie that came out in the 50s that was like it was a horror movie back
Sci-fi,
then.
yeah.
Now, sci-fi horror movie. Now I would say it's probably pretty cartoonish if we watched it now. Much like the things that we think are scary now will look cartoonish in Kenny G's time. So, and when we refer to Mike Benz, for those of you who are listening now in 2024, it's Mike. He's at Mike Benz, BENZ Cyber on X, formerly known as Twitter. He puts out a ton of information. There's a depth of information he puts out. I would really recommend people check that out, because he really puts out a lot of stuff. But one of the interesting things that happened is somewhere around 2017, there was a bit of a shift in, all of our institutions, including these ones that kind of these, hidden secret, organizations like the CIA and stuff like that. They still were very much for Americans having right of free speech and protecting our, what you and I would have considered traditional kind of American ideals.
Right.
His theory, and one that I'm coming more and more to like fully support and believe, is that somewhere around 2017, when Donald Trump broke a lot of things, and people like really began to shift. It was like, he has to go at all costs, and he's this Hitlerian kind of whatever. Well, one of the groups that went along with that is the Blob, and according to Mike Benz, and he's got reasons that I won't get into because I don't understand it all that well, to be honest. But there are things you would expect: money, power, status. Like it's all the usual suspects. The details, if you want that, he has it. I can just tell you, it's the stuff that you would expect anytime people, that their morals are corrupted, it's always for the same kinds of reasons, and these are no different, right? So, but what happened was there was a shift in the old way prior to 2016, 2017 was we defended democracy, which was essentially the will of the people. And then how would you describe, Dave, how he says what democracy is now?
Well, democracy is now not individuals, but rather institutions that have power over individual portions of of life. So it's not anymore the Brian and Dave's right to do what they want. That's democratic, but it's really all of the administrative and bureaucratic state, both here and abroad, their
Mhm.
ability to do what they want. Those are the institutions that are really being defended by the blob, so to speak.
Right. And some of the institutions that have been deemed as critical institutions that must be protected at the expense, perhaps, of what average citizens want,
Right,
include the alphabet soup, of agencies in
right,
DC, CIA, NSA, all that kind of
right,
stuff, but also corporations like
yep,
Wall Street corporations, also legacy media, also educational institutions, like the things you and I. One of the first episodes we did was talking about like these 5 different kinds of institutions
right,
that we really couldn't figure out, like why is all this stuff happening with these institutions? They've been corrupted, they've been bastardized, and whatever. And it's the same exact ones we talked about. It's all the
right,
same players. And so on one hand, this offers an explanation as to, okay, this all kind of starts making sense now. They really didn't like Donald Trump. It seems there's some shenanigans in places going on, like Ukraine and things
mhm,
like that. That if that stuff was uncovered, like bad things are going to happen to people. Like maybe some people did some things they shouldn't. Maybe our government
right.
did some things that they shouldn't, and all this stuff is at risk of being exposed. It seems to be. Am I saying it accurately? Like this is like the concern and then what the blob is trying to protect. Am I saying it right,
Yes.
Dave?
Yes, and in fact, to put a finer point even on what we're talking about, the institutions have to be protected as long as they go along with blob thought. I don't know if
Right.
that's a new word or not, but
You just made
in
it up, so it is
I
now.
just
Yeah.
made it up. Well, I took it in China right now. The sort of the cultural thing is Xi thought. So the thoughts of Xi Jinping are
Yeah.
literally said in society to be Xi thought. Well, so here we have blob thought. So an institution, a corporation, media is okay as long as it goes along with blob thought. If it does not go along with that, however, then it falls as a opponent to democratic institutions, an
Yeah.
opponent it's trying to tear down democracy.
Right. So now when we hear an example would be Elon Musk, who 5 years
Yes,
ago was like held up in high esteem, like he's driving
sure.
Tesla and electric cars, and now he's anti-democratic, even
Yes,
though X is arguably the freest platform as far as speech goes. He's
right,
deemed anti-democratic because he's not going along with the blob. So
right.
that's a perfect example of what we're talking about.
Yeah.
And it seems to me like it's this is also fascinating, and this all falls in line with the stuff you and I've been talking about with the fourth turning in the pendulum and
Mhm.
these cyclical things. And in my view, it's this all makes perfect sense because there's an explanation for these things, and it all falls in alignment with the cycles. And
Yeah.
also, I believe if it wasn't this, if these folks hadn't begun doing these things, somebody else would have, because we're at that time
Right.
in the cycle where somebody's going to step into this vacuum and start doing these things
That's
because
right.
things are ripe for corruption, or we've gotten so much hubris or so much arrogance or whatever, because we're at that point in the cycle where
Yeah.
somebody's going to do this. It happens to be these people, but it just as likely could have been another group if it hadn't been these people first. Is that a good way of
Yeah.
saying it, Dave?
100%, because at this point in the cycle, there is no agreement about anything. And when you
Right.
have, and the only way you have guardrails on a society, especially a freedom-based society like our own, the only way you have guardrails to prevent things like executive overreach or administrative overreach is when there's a strong degree of societal cohesion. Even if there's differences in the 80s, there was liberals and conservatives, but there was still a strong degree of societal cohesion. So
Right.
And so the blob could not have existed
No
in
way.
that
Yeah.
kind of power in that time. But now we're arguing about every little less thing. So we have no
Yeah.
chance, as there's no great mass of people to oppose this thing that's happening, where the administrative state essentially takes over and rules everything, and we can complain about it, but nothing ever happens.
Right. So in 1985, in 1995, even 2005, no way this could have happened because
No.
there were so many people who were still very much like our identity meant something as Americans. Our
Yeah.
our
Yeah.
ideals meant something, and we were all
Right.
proud of that. And somebody somewhere would have said, "This is nonsense. You guys are going too far." In fact, what the hell are you thinking? I'm calling like 27 people to report what's going on.
Right.
But now we're in an era where I saw a video yesterday. I think I didn't save it for us to watch here because there's a million of these. They're not hard to find. It was somebody protesting like a pro-Palestine kind of a thing,
Right.
and somebody walked up and put a microphone in front of him, and they basically said, "You're missing the protester." Basically said, "You're missing the point. The point is to bring down the United States and Western civilization." The
Yeah.
protester like said this, so that thought process has permeated higher education, the media. Like you and I have gone through this list before,
Yeah.
and so now there's at least as many people who are like America's rotten from the core, and like it was built on artificially good ideals, and they were all actually really crummy, and that the whole thing has to come down. Now there's enough people in high places, on the org chart in the government or whatever, or in media or in corporations or whatever, who are like expressly anti traditional American values,
Right.
that this stuff can foster and grow because half the people around are like rooting it on and enabling it. Where 20 years ago, people still would have been, no, you're crazy. Like men can't be
Yeah.
women, boys can't be girls. Um, all this stuff that we're seeing that you and I have been talking about for the last 6 months, that we've seen over the last 15 years, was nowhere even on the radar. People would have put a kibosh on this in an instant.
Right, right. And it reminds me of a scene from one of the scenes from Star Wars. I don't know if you've watched like the first three Star Wars, but there
I've
was
seen the first three, and I think I've seen maybe one of the other 27, but I'm not
oh,
sure.
oh, you're so uncultured, Brian.
I
I'm
know,
very
I know, I know.
I'm very sad about this. Well, so anyway, there was a scene there where the planet of Luke and Leia's mother had gotten invaded, and so she went to the Senate of the Galactic Republic and said, "My planet has been invaded." And the Chancellor said, "We're going to go there. We can't allow this to happen." And somebody leans over and whispers in his ear and says, "Hey, the Chancellor comes back and says, okay, well, will the senator from Naboo accept if we send a blue ribbon commission to study the problem of whether it's been invaded or not?" So, the bureaucrat, I mean, there's so
That's
many
awesome.
parallels. The
Yeah, yeah,
bureaucratic state now has expanded so much that you can't even ask basic questions. I'm for women's rights. Well, define a woman.
yeah,
Y
yeah, yeah,
you
yeah.
know, and when you get to a place where there are 0 solid answers, there are no boundaries, and then guess what happens? Power corrupts, absolute power corrupts absolutely, and
Right.
the bureaucratic state has ultimate power, not the elected state. The bureaucratic state has ultimate power, and therefore, when it sees an opening, it's naturally going to take it. The thing that we can tell Kenny G about in the future is that it might not happen the way it has here. It might not happen the
No.
way it did in Star Wars, but it
Right.
will happen because that principle is a solid principle that happened in the Roman world, the Roman Empire.
Yes.
Why did Rome go from being a republic to being an empire? Why are we likely on a sort of a similar path? Because of human nature, which always rears its ugly head. And that's where we're at
Yeah.
again today.
What's funny that the timing of you and I talking about this. This is like one of, I don't know, maybe 3 episodes we've done where a week in advance we decided we were going to talk about. But coincidentally, not because I can orchestrate what the New York Times does, but coincidentally, they did something yesterday that just shows like that you and I are not crazy. I don't think so. It's not hard to find instances where places like MSNBC, New York Times, Washington Post, like the usual
Right.
um, left-leaning outlets. What's the Atlantic,
Oh yeah.
Politico? Like those are like the big player. That's like the top 5, I would guess, or 7 or
Yeah.
whatever. Um, of just a few years ago, they were basically calling people lunatics who believed in this thing called the quote unquote deep state. right?
Right.
There's no shortage. Like you can Google or get on X and search for a montage, and you can just see like them saying like people who believe in the deep state are nuts, and there's no such thing as deep state, and like laughing at them and whatever. Okay, this is an opinion article yesterday. It's actually an opinion video yesterday that
Okay.
came out from the New York Times. So this is March 19th that this came out, and the headline is: "It turns out the deep state is actually kind of awesome."
Well, there you go. There you go.
What that illustrates to me is you and I are talking about how like the people who go along with the stuff are like protected and like assured that their status will not be questioned and things like that. Those who question it are banished and suffer the wrath. And we've seen instances, again, Elon Musk would be one of those. And so it all is making sense. It feels like, I heard somebody say something once like the number of emperors and kings who had a long reign, meaning like 25 plus years, who ended old age maintaining their sanity, is a very, very small percentage. And the theory is part of the reason is because there's no resistance after X number of decades of people just telling you you're right and you're the smartest thing ever. And like there's no resistance. You just go insane because you just come to believe that you're God over time, and that what you want is what people all should be subjected to. Notice I did not say what you want is what they should want. That's not what I said. What you want is what people should be subjected to. And it literally makes people insane over years. Now, I don't know how true that is. It might have been mercury poisoning for all I know. I have no idea. But these are people who study, this kinds of stuff. And in our system of government, we've not had that because we've had term limits for presidents. We've had these checks and balances and things like that. But now we have something like, I don't know, 1947 and now. So what is that? 60 years, 70 years, 80 years,
80
whatever
years,
that is.
almost.
Of this entity who has had basically carte blanche to topple governments, to establish anti-government groups and fund anti-government groups in other countries, and put on coups and like empower generals to overthrow governments. Like they've had like this unfettered ability to do this kind of stuff, and it feels to me like it's like, how could it go any other way? Like this is the same thing as the emperor in 400 AD.
Right.
It's the same thing. It's just with a different technology and a different organizational structure, but it's the exact same behavior with the exact same outcomes.
Well, it's very predictable because if you get power, if you get fame, power, fortune, all those types of things, you start to believe, this is again natural human, thinking. You start to believe that you really deserve it, one, and if you deserve it, you must deserve it because you are smarter, better, etc., than everybody else. And therefore, what you do is right. Not that you're going to do what's right, but what you do is right. So therefore, if you look at sometimes when people talk about the deep state and they say, well, you guys just a bunch of conspiracy theorists. No, the deep state, the way that I would look at that is not that there's a bunch of black-hatted, guys sitting around like this saying, well, how can we mess with them now? No, it's a group of people who think that they are better than everybody else. They know more than everybody else. And therefore, because they are better and they know more, they should be in control and tell everybody else what they should do with their lives. And they believe that that is a good. They believe that it is an honest, appropriate good. And if you oppose them, well, a few eggs got to be broken along the way. That's an acceptable loss to achieve the great, utopian paradise that they are seeking to do. That's what, and that's where I think it's important to understand that you're not looking for a bunch of people that are out torturing cats. You're looking for people that have good intentions, but they're corrupted by power and money. And no, there's certainly some of those cat torturers out there. There's certainly some of those folks are involved, but the majority of them are people that honestly believe that they're better than we are and need to keep us in our lane and control us.
Yeah, I think what's fascinating about this is if you were to, there's no doubt there's people out there who think right now that you and I are absolute lunatics. Okay.
Of course.
And what we're describing, not just in general, but about this topic in specifically, right? Those people probably would not have a hard time wrapping their head around this in an instance where you had like a ultra like culty religious father who was like subjecting his kids to like harsh corporal punishment and like maybe
Right.
physically beating them and like really restricting them from like having friends and stuff like that because he believes that's what's best for them, even though
Right.
he's kind of deranged and he's lost his mind
Right.
and he's taken it way to an extreme that's way too far. People who will think that you and I are lunatics for saying this stuff, if they saw an instance like that on 60 Minutes one day of this father who was going to church twice a week and whatever,
Right.
and the Bible consumed him and he was lashing out at his kids, they'd go, aha, that's that behavior. That's those guys are lunatics. That's
Right.
so easy to see. And that's why culture bad and that's why religion's bad. The same people would have no way and would totally think that you and I are nuts for talking about the exact same behaviors in
Right.
this other capacity.
Right. That's exactly right. And it's fascinating to watch. As I've talked to people about behaviors of deep state bureaucrats, et cetera, and well, but their intentions are good. If there's an alignment with what they think is important. In other words, I believe in the institutions. I believe in the media. I was talking to a friend of mine about the three major networks. I haven't watched ABC, CBS, or NBC News for years now. I think they're completely full of it. I think they're controlled. I think they're 100% biased. So no, that's not true. There's if you're predisposed to believe in something, then you're going to give it a pass, even when it's shown that it does factually awful things. Oh, the United Nations, you point out the United Nations Oil for Food program, the biggest scandal in like human history of any international organization to that point, back in the days of the Iraqi food for oil program. And oh well, yeah, they had a little bump in the road there. You tend to give the things you believe in a pass, but when the other side does it, then they're evil. They're the spawn of Satan, and they can't get a pass. So I think it's especially important for me to understand that when I think about the foibles or the foibles. See, it's a pass still. When I think about anything that my side does wrong, would I judge the other side harshly? And if the answer is true, then I should judge my side harshly too for that same thing. If I'm going to be an honest person, right? So, and
Yeah.
that's the only way the deep state would come down in the deep state, it's not going to come down in this era. It's not. It's going to continue to grow until it collapses. But the only way it would otherwise come down is if enough people realize that I don't care what they're going after. These means that they're going after it, the blobby means that they're going after it with are immoral, unethical. I don't care if you get the best thing in mind. You still can't be my dictator.
Yeah. And part of the problem with this particular instance is there are times, I'm sure. Now I don't know. I've never been in a position where I would have any kind of understanding of this on a real practical level. But I got to imagine sometime in history over the last couple of hundred years, just for starters, but for sure over the last couple thousand years, there have been legitimate times where it makes sense in a preemptive manner that going out and doing something to stop something is coming before it actually happens, maybe with another government, with another military,
Sure.
maybe saves hundreds of thousands or tens of thousands or millions of
Sure.
lives. I'm sure that stuff has happened. So there's no way you could say, well, they just shouldn't do that kind of stuff. Okay, well, that's easy to say, and maybe that's the right answer. But I'm also sure that there's plenty of lives that have been saved because they did some of this stuff.
Sure.
So the problem is there's no clean right answer or wrong answer.
No, there isn't.
It's always sometimes people are really doing their best and they completely blow it. Sometimes people are being complete morons and they make things worse. And sometimes we have dumb luck and we just stumble into the right thing. All those things happen on things like, buying bicycles all the way up to like warfare, like large scale warfare.
Right.
Like
Right.
it covers the gamut, right? So the problem is these are not easily solved problems, and there's times where that preemptive stuff makes sense, and they probably have a track record, I would imagine, of these preemptive things having what they would see as good results.
Yeah.
However, so that being said, we have a pretty long history now in my lifetime, at least, of you look at the last 5 or 6 or whatever major, I guess you would call them scuffles we've been in. We haven't really been in a war, I don't think, that in
Right.
my lifetime.
Yeah.
But Vietnam, Afghanistan, Iraq, the Kuwait stuff.
Yeah.
If you want to go back to some of the skirmishes in the with Manuel Noriega, I suppose you could, and Grenada, and like I suppose you could get in that kind of stuff too. But going back to like Vietnam and even the Korean War,
Mhm.
we don't have a history of like doing this stuff well. This dabbling in other governments, like
No.
what happened in Libya and what happened in Iraq and what happened in
Yeah.
Afghanistan. Like we have a great history of going over and dabbling in things and leaving an absolute freaking catastrophe behind when we go because we lose
Yeah.
interest and the next thing comes along.
Right.
Nowhere is there anyone aside from a guy named Donald Trump and maybe a few others to say this is dumb, we shouldn't be doing this.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that calling that out is the threat or a significant threat to the blob, and that's why those people have to be out. That's why those people have to be silenced or mocked or canceled
Right.
or whatever. And at some point, I agree with you 100%. At some point, it's going to fall down like a house of cards because it is a
Yeah.
house of cards. But it's just so infuriating as a citizen, just trying to do the best we can in our lives that
Right.
this stuff is happening on our behalf, so to speak. It
Yeah.
kind of pisses me off.
Well, we to your point about these police actions, I mean, they're really back from, the first police action, if you will, on a major scale after World War II. World War II was the last war we were involved in. Now, I do not mean any disrespect to the war fighters. My dad's one, the people
Yeah,
of
of course.
Vietnam,
No.
so I mean no disrespect to the war fighters, but none of those events, Korea, Vietnam, Kuwait, Desert Storm, Desert Shield, Afghanistan, those were not wars. If they were
Right.
wars, we would have won them. We had
Yeah.
100% capability. There was no physical possibility of anybody stopping us from winning each one of those if it were a real war. They
Right.
weren't wars. They were us extending our influence into different portions of the world, and then getting tired of the exercise and saying, "Forget it."
Yeah.
That's what brought each of those things down. So I think what we have then is we've got one of and trillions of dollars, and this attempt on our part to believe that I was originally for the war in Iraq. That was my it's like,
You have to be
well,
more
heck yeah.
specific. Which one? Weren't there a couple?
Well, the big one, Desert Storm.
Okay.
I
There
was
was a storm. Okay,
originally
gotcha.
for Desert Storm,
Yeah.
because I'm like, Saddam had yellow cake uranium. We got to get this guy out of here. It's preemptive. It's good. It's all that. We tried to nation build. We screwed the whole thing up. We have no capability. It was the height of hubris to believe that we can nation build like that, because
Yeah.
we can nation build after a war. Like Japan was nation building. Germany was
Yeah.
nation building after World War II. We can do that, but we didn't have any ability to do that ever since then. The point being that that message hasn't got through to the blob yet. The blob thinks it can control the world. It thinks that because we've got influence and money and power and warships and stuff everywhere in the world, that we can control the world. And one of two things is going to happen here's my somewhat prediction. One of two things is going to happen. Either the blob essentially completely collapses and we kind of come home and become more insular. I mean, it's still going to be a global economy, but either that'll happen, or we will say, we've talked about this before on the cast, we will say, none of these things work because we just didn't have the will to do it, because we weren't strong enough. We're going to be strong enough. We're the empire of the United States. We're going to come out of the crisis and say, forget it. We're tired of pussyfooting around. We're tired of Afghanistan-like experiences. We're tired of Iraq type experiences, Korea, Vietnam. We're just going to go do it. And if you don't like us, we're going to turn your capital into glass. One of those two things, I think, is the likely outcome of the crisis era. Now, I don't want to see the United States become an empire, but I'm in terms of how do I think things will turn out? I kind of think that's where it might be going.
I think we might have the first time you and I are going to really disagree on something.
Cool. Bring
We've
it.
had small disagreements, but I think we might really disagree on this. And I think that part of the reason the main reason I don't agree with that is because there's no money in peace. There's no money in
But there isn't domination.
Yeah, but historically, how the rich people in our country have gotten money is by starting these wars, and like the big arms manufacturers get a
Sure,
lot of money by starting
sure.
these things, and then once once we're 10 years in and we've expended like billions or tens of billions or hundreds of billions or trillions or whatever it is dollars of armaments, like
Right.
we're on to the next thing, and that's where the money has been made historically. So um, we'd have to have a new incentive structure where people made money off of other things besides just like stealing people's oil and stuff like that. Because I
Well,
don't
but
think that
that
that would.
is but that is the traditional incentive structure for empires is we go into Iraq, we
Yeah,
say, "We freed you from Saddam. You got, 18 bazillion barrels of
yeah.
oil. It's ours now, buddy. And you don't like it? Well, you can live in a spider hole with Saddam."
Oh man, that sounds absolutely. I don't know. I don't know if historically speaking, like looking at what was it, Rome that had the most square miles or whatever,
Oh,
like
yeah.
Roman Empire. Like it gets so big you can't control it. I don't have any belief that any government I've ever seen would have the capacity to keep track of what's going on in Ethiopia from DC. I just
AI.
I just don't think that they would have
AI.
and now, I'm not saying that they wouldn't try. I am saying that they would not be
Yeah,
successful. So I
yeah.
think that maybe that's the distinction there.
Well, yeah, I'm
Um,
not talking about an empire that lasts 800 years like the Roman Empire did. So,
okay,
you know,
now
yeah,
I'm
I mean
tracking.
that I can't predict that far. I'm just saying that the response to the current crisis era, the response to the failure of the blob, and to create the image of the world that the liberal international order that the blob wants, that failure will result in one of two things, and neither of those things are necessarily going to last. I mean, going back to generations theory, maybe last 20, 40, 60, 80
Yeah,
years, and then it'll all
yeah,
be
yeah.
over. We'll start
The
again.
next crisis will all be
The
over
next crisis
for
comes
sure.
along.
I'm still leaning towards. I only see three outcomes. One is an intervention from an outside force, like we had in World War II with Pearl
Yeah,
Harbor, and something bad enough galvanized us all together, and we kind of drop this argument we're having now, which is a
right.
significant one. So it'd have to be a major outside force. It would have to be an existential threat, and so that
Absolutely.
seems somewhat unlikely. The other one is, again, some sort of civil war. And I don't mean like muskets and trenches. It could be an economic, it could be a technological. I don't know what that would look like. And the other one that is like the more that this, like the blob is kind of like this kind of stuff, and the more dysfunctional DC gets, and the more out of touch they get with what people actually want, like the more people that go to prison for doing things that 10 years ago weren't that bad. And
No.
meanwhile, illegal immigrants can come here and do things worse and get out of jail the same day with no bail. The more
Right.
that stuff happens, the more I feel like people are going to unite and just be like, enough of this government. Like
Yeah.
this government has gotten too far out of whack, and we'll have to. And again, I don't mean like, storming the Capitol. That's not what I mean. But people could just not pay their taxes.
Well,
People could just do all kinds of people. There could be a general strike, and all you need is like 8% of the population to stop going to work for a month, and the whole thing falls apart.
well, and you know what I think is interesting is I think all three of those things could come to pass simultaneously.
Yeah,
I don't think it necessarily has to be one or the other or the other. I think it could be, okay, we've got uh, China taking over Taiwan. We've got at the same time that there is tremendous civil unrest, and so there is a literal some kind of civil war. However, it looks because China says, now they're busy killing each other or fighting each other at least. We'll take Taiwan now. The military mobilizes, and so all of these things, I think, well, there will be an existential crisis event that's gonna happen. Something, I don't know, and it could
yeah,
be one, two, three, or one, two, and three. It could be all of them simultaneously, and then the outcome of that is what the question is: is there is there a return to something or a new something that's part old, part new? That's what we'll see.
yeah, for sure. There's no point in like trying to figure out what the future is going to hold. I agree. Yeah,
Oh, but it's
like we said
fun,
before, the people in the 20s had no idea what it was going to look like in the 40s.
right?
There's no way that could happen.
Yeah.
Um, uh, I do think that all this stuff is going to get like ugly because the kinds of things at the disposal, not just like, okay, everybody's talking about like nuclear, like they got their button on the okay, whatever. That's scary. I'm not minimizing that. But the kind of psychological skills the Blob has are like, we won't even see some of the stuff. Like some of the stuff, if it is as nefarious as what it sounds like it could be, some of the stuff has been at play for years, and we're just now catching on to it. So they're already 7 years ahead of us, or 4 years ahead of us, or whatever. It's that part is relatively scary for me.
Well, that's I think in terms of the near term, that's probably the most scary thing. Yes, because if you combine the fellow we were talking about earlier, Mike Benz, he had a technology role. Part of his role in the federal government was technology and its impact and uses and such. And he points out, and I mean, it's obvious to me because I'm in technology, not that I do what he did, but it's obvious to me that artificial intelligence, that revolution, if it's in the wrong hands, can be just as destructive a tool as anything we've ever had. Because if you're able to very successfully manipulate people's minds and their thoughts that give them the impetus to do actions, you could weaponize people just through their screens. I mean, so that is that kind of power is probably the most frightening. It's probably as much or more frightening than nuclear war.
Speaking of technology, I want to play this clip for you. I wasn't planning to share this with you, but I want to share this with you because I think this is really a really fascinating thing. This is from Jensen. Is it Jensen Huang? Is that his last
Jensen
name?
Huang,
The guy
yeah,
from
familiar.
NVIDIA.
Yeah.
So I'm gonna share this video. It's pretty short. It won't take long. And he's talking about resilience. And again, I think it's 1 minute and 6 seconds. I don't know if we'll get through the whole thing or not. We may not need to, but I think he says something really fascinating here. And I wonder if this pertains to what we're talking about. So here's Jensen Huang, CEO of NVIDIA.
People with very high expectations have very low resilience. And unfortunately, resilience matters in success. I don't know how to teach it to you except for I hope suffering happens to you. And I was fortunate that I grew up with my parents providing a condition for us to be successful on the one hand, but there were plenty of opportunities for setbacks and suffering. And to this day, I use the phrase pain and suffering inside our company with great glee. And the reason, and I mean that. Boy, this is going to cause a lot of pain and suffering. And I mean that in a happy way, because you want to refine the character of your company. You want greatness out of them. And greatness is not intelligence. Greatness comes from character, and character is informed out of smart people. It's formed out of people who suffered. And so that's it. And so if I could wish upon you, I don't know how to do it. For all of you Stanford students, I wish upon you ample doses of pain and suffering.
So I heard that the other day, and I was just like blown away. And I was, first of all, I agree with everything he said. There's not a single part of what he said that I don't agree with. I think that as an entrepreneur and as a person who's getting better at life as I age and wants to be better at lots of different things, I agree with everything he said.
Absolutely.
And then it hit me. Does this theory, which I agree with 100% on an individual level, does this theory also apply collectively?
Yeah.
And maybe this is what's necessary. The same thing he's talking about. If you said, okay, instead of talking to Brian and Dave as individuals, for the United States, for the globe, I wish you suffering, because that's where great ideas come from.
100. I think if you look at human history, the greatest advances, the greatest ideas came as results of the greatest risks and the greatest, suffering. I 100% agree. I mean, medical breakthroughs, the Apollo missions. The Apollo missions came as a result of national humiliation by the Soviet Union, by the, when our literal way of life as we saw it was under threat. I mean, we were scared for our lives. So what did we do? We innovated our way through the Apollo missions. Certainly this, and I think that, that theory is a wonderful parallel theory to this generational theory that you and I talk about all the time, because right now, he started off, I love the way he started off, talking about how if you've got high expectations, you have low resilience.
Yeah.
That's brilliant. That's brilliant. And now the
That would explain, it would describe how most people would describe 20-year-old to 33-year-olds right now.
Well, yes, that's right. Because the expectations of everything being at our fingertips, of having lots of leisure time, of just it's all there's no
Yeah.
existential threat. The existential threat is if the internet goes down for 15 minutes and I can't get on TikTok
Right,
and watch the
right,
latest
right,
video.
right.
So so there's not a lot of resilience there. But then the cycles, or God will enforce upon us a period of suffering that allows us to exceed ourselves, how we've been, and to achieve greatness and to move forward. So we move forward in these ways. So that is a wonderful clip, and I completely agree with everything he said. Even though I don't want to live through suffering. I mean, what he was saying to those Stanford students, I wish you had ample degree of pain and suffering. It's like, yeah, absolutely, but shoot, do I really have to?
Yeah.
But it's
Well, I
true.
mean, again, as a my profession is helping people navigate through tough things, and
Sure.
sometimes my role is to not help steer them away from hard things, is to steer them right into the hard things,
Yeah.
because that's what's necessary right now to make the most amount of progress. So I
Right.
agree with all that stuff, and I agree with it, and it's terrifying at the same time.
Well, yes.
And on the scale we're talking about, it's not going bankrupt. It's not somebody, losing their financial security. It's not somebody losing their house even. It's not somebody having to start over in life at age 53, or like
Right.
something that would be like a big deal. We're talking about millions of people dying.
Life and
And that
death.
and that's just on a scale that it's hard for me
Yeah.
to wrap my head around and imagine, again, the age old question, what possible good could come out of this that would be worth all the costs and things like that.
Yeah.
On the other hand, looking back through history, and that much of our US history, I can't imagine having gone any other way. And
No.
and there was tremendous suffering, and there was tremendous lives, the number of lives lost. And to me, it all kept building, and it was like 3 steps forward, 1 step back kind of a thing. Like we would make big progress and we had these huge setbacks. We make big progress and we meet huge setbacks, but it was constantly on a continuum of moving forward.
Yeah.
But now that we're staring the crisis at from this perspective, from this vantage point, having not gone through it yet, and everything is at risk, and we can't see the possible upside,
Right.
it's scary as hell. And
Yeah.
and we don't have the benefit of hindsight, obviously. And so it puts it in a whole different perspective, where we're kind of going to have to do our part to make sure the generations behind us get the benefit. And I don't know that we got it in us, to be frank.
Well, and there's the question. The reality is that so there's a couple of realities. One of the realities is that we're going to go through hard times.
Yeah.
So that's if
That's a certainty at this point.
it's just a
I would
certainty.
say, yeah,
You just
yeah,
look
yeah.
at history, and you just look at, I mean, you just can't deny that, looking at 10,000 or more years of human history. It's the way things happen. We don't know. We hope and we believe every time in the past we've gone through that. We've gone through, the Black Plague. We've gone through, all sorts of things as humanity, and we're better off today on balance than we were in the 1500s, in the 500s, in the,
Yeah.
BCs. So every time in the past we've gone through something like whatever we're going to go through, we've done fine. We've come out the other end. The other thing that's true about that is, going through that, there were a lot of people killed, maimed, hurt, destroyed. We have no guarantee that we're not going to be the ones that are going to be the broken eggs as history
Yeah.
advances. We don't know.
Yeah.
Maybe we will be. I hope not. I don't want to be, but
Yeah.
I don't control it. So I think the thing we have to look at when we look at those kinds of things is, yes, there is a likely future coming for us, and hopefully we can contribute to that future. And and also I would address it through faith too, and say, look, my life has
Sure.
meaning beyond this life. So I think those two things, that's how you look at hard times.
Well, and I mentioned one time before on this podcast where I heard Neil Howe, the author of The Fourth Turning Is Here and a co-author of The Fourth Turning and Generations and all that, say that like these crisis eras are like going through a divorce,
Yeah.
where at the end of it you say, man, 5 years later, 3 years later, 10 years later, like that for all people involved, that was the best possible thing that could have happened.
Right.
Would you want to go through it again? Absolutely freaking not.
No,
But it's the best thing that could have happened, because what the alternative was untenable. The alternative was worse. And so the reason I'm bringing these things up is because one of the things that is my least favorite part of this podcast, which I really enjoy this podcast, by the way. I really like doing it with you, Dave. You're a lot of fun to do this with, and you're really smart. You know this stuff, and you understand this stuff way better than I do. But one of the things I don't like is we're always talking about doom and gloom. And so I heard that clip, and I kind of contextualized it with, this could mean the same thing on a collective scale, not just individuals. I'm trying to, like, as the stuff with the Blob, as I see these things, and I see the Mike Benz clips, he puts out like 3 hours a day of stuff.
Yeah, I know.
I mean, he puts out a tremendous amount of stuff, and I see, clips here and there, bits and pieces, and 8 minutes in, I'm just like furious, like beside myself, like, who the hell these people think they are? Like that, like who decides that they are so smart that they can control people's lives like this, and like who the F are these people, right?
Right.
And then I've since seeing that Jensen Huang clip, I've been able to so far go okay, yes, but it's going to be for a greater good. And I keep hoping, I keep trying to reframe things that way. And I don't know for anybody listening if that would help you or not, but that's what I'm trying. I'm not saying it's working all the time, but that's what I'm trying. And so far it's given me a little bit of peace.
Well, and it is a survival mechanism. So I think you have to look at it that way. Whatever, there's sometimes that I can't look at the news for 2 or 3 days at a time, because it's just, you get too much in the muck and the grime and the whole thing. But I think you have to look at it that way. And I think that's one of the glass is half full part of our discussion of generations. That I had this discussion with somebody the other day, said, look, this crisis thing, I think this is going to happen. I think we got, X number of years, give or take 5 or 10 years. And he said, wow. And I said, but look, every time in the past, something good has happened as a result. So I believe that something good is going to happen as a result. And I think that people get, there's a lot of angst around these days. I mean, there's a lot of, especially during an election year, everybody's mad at everybody else. Everybody, So, when you look at all that and you say, look, you got to lift yourself above all of this, low level stuff that we're seeing on a day-to-day basis. You have to look beyond yourself. You have, whatever it takes, you have to look beyond yourself in order to see that what it is right now, whether your candidate wins or loses, whether your party wins or loses, whether your country wins or loses, whatever it is. And I don't have, I'm going to bring that quote next. We've got a great quote about this. Whichever it is, great things have always happened after. So just have faith that there's a plan, that, if you believe in God, like I do, God's going to bring it to pass. You got to have faith that it's going to turn out okay.
Yeah. All right. Well, that's my little bit of glimmer of hope that I'm offering. I do recommend for people who have not heard of Mike Benz. I'm telling you, there's more information, and he's got such detail. Like, he's got the goods. It's not spitballing ideas. He's not hypothesizing. He's bringing details and facts. And if you're wondering, like, what in the hell is really going on, I tell you, I've learned more in the last 6 weeks or so than I had learned in a long time before that. So, also, don't forget to go to our Rumble channel. If you're listening to this on audio only and you want to comment, you want to tell us where we're completely full of crap and where we 100% nailed it, which of course you're going to say we 100% nailed it. Like, duh. Of course that's how it's going to go. But we do really want to say, like, articulate from your perspective too, for you listening, like, what do you think we're missing here? What do you think we're not getting right? What are we misstating? And of course, what are we getting right? Rumble is a great place to do it. There's a great comment section there. Also, you can go to unsilentpodcast.com. And until next week, this is Dave and Brian signing off.
See you next week.
Do you want to be unsilent? Make your voice heard on our social media channels and share where you think we got it right or wrong. Go to unsilentpodcast.com for social links so you can join the discussion.